Hi, and welcome everybody. We're so glad to have you here joining us for our special Loma Talk featuring our Alumni Board President and Class of 92 alumnus Matt Robertson and our wonderful team at the Center for Justice and Reconciliation here at PLNU, led by alumnus Kim Berry-Jones. I'm Kendall Lucas, and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations here at Point Loma, and I'm just thrilled that you could join us today on your lunch hour. Thanks for giving us this block of time today. Over the last decade, PLNU and the CJR team have been dedicated to fighting against human trafficking, both locally in San Diego as well as globally. We recognize the overwhelming work ahead, working to stop human trafficking and assist those who have been victims of trafficking. But today, I am grateful we get to take a moment to learn together about the important work that Matt is doing through Agape International Ministries and how the Center for Justice and Reconciliation is working to provide, as their mission statement says, research, advocacy, and innovation dedicated to justice and reconciliation to transform our community through social change. Please feel free to submit any questions you might have for Matt or the center throughout our time today in the chat box below, and we will get to as many of them as we can. And with that, I would like to introduce you to Rihanna Contreras, the Program Director for Community Relations at the CJR. Welcome, Rihanna, and Kim and Matt. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Kendall. We're definitely looking forward to hearing from our speaker today, Matt Robertson, who was recently honored with a Hope Rising Award at our event in June to recognize his dedication to doing whatever it takes to end human trafficking and provide freedom and hope. So here's a little bit about Matt as we get going. Matt was class of 92 at Point Loma. He served as the National Director for Habitat for Humanity in Uganda and with World Vision in their US office. He also served as a pastor at Northwood Church in Texas and later at Bayside Church in Northern California. And he now serves as the Director of Relational Advancement for AIM, which stands for Agape International Ministries. And it's a Christ-centered ministry focused on fighting sex trafficking in Cambodia, Belize, and the US. Matt oversees a distributed global team that works with individuals, families, churches, and companies to advance AIM's mission. He and his wife, Sheila, married 25 years, have 2 children, Kareen, a recent student at Point Loma, and Samuel. And Matt loves surfing in the summer and snowboarding in the winter. So it's great to have you, Matt.
Thank you. Thanks, Rihanna and Kendall and Kim for this opportunity to share. I'm excited to share just a little bit about the work of AIM and also perspective on global and local trafficking as well. I'm really honored to be able to share with you guys. Thanks everyone for joining. So as we open up, I want to share a short video with you, which will help provide an overview of AIM's work as well as some context for our conversation. So why don't we go ahead and watch that video?
We couldn't imagine the extent of the evil that allowed 4-year-olds to be trafficked and sexually abused by men coming from all over the world.
John, how old do you want?
Young.
How old?
What's the youngest?
Huh?
The youngest.
These girls needed to be rescued, but more than that, once rescued, they needed a safe place for healing, and that safe place had to include experiencing the love of Jesus Christ if those girls were going to heal. So we opened a restoration home, and those girls did experience the love of Christ, and they did find healing, but healing more than just for themselves, a healing that led them to be the protector of other kids. And it was working. Within months, our restoration home was full. Then my phone rang. A girl was calling who was trapped in a brothel and asked us, please come and rescue me. At that time, we didn't have a SWAT team, so we gave the information to another organization, and we waited 3 days for that rescue to happen. On the day it was scheduled, it was tipped off, and all those girls were taken to a different place. Now we didn't know where they were. One thing we knew is we could never let that happen again. So we partnered with the Cambodian government and started our own SWAT team. And when this partnership with the government started, everything turned around. Instead of raids being tipped off, there was hardly ever a raid that wasn't successful. But we go beyond the rescue. So when we rescue a girl, they don't have an education. Most of them, their parents sold them, so they can't go home. We're able to give them a safe home where they find healing, where they get a good education. And when they're ready to go back into society, we give them a good job. And together, those things will keep them from going back to that life they escaped. What's really cool is these young girls grow up. So many of them grow up to be abolitionists themselves. They don't leave AIM, they become a part of it. They work in our employment centers, in prevention, in our schools, on the SWAT team to rescue girls. And now that girl that made the phone call, she's not only rescued, she's not only healed, but today she's a social worker of our SWAT team. And when a rescue happens, the first person those girls see is her. So much incredible work has been done through the power of Christ, but there's still so much more to do. There are girls trapped in brothels. We know where they are, and we know how to get them out. But we can't do it alone. We need your help. Join us and fight for their freedom. Together, we can defeat the greatest evil of our lifetime.
That gives a little context and overview of our work in Cambodia. I will share a little bit more about that history as we go along. First, what I want to do is just provide a global context for trafficking. We'll start in globally, we'll move to Cambodia, and then we will end with a conversation around local trafficking and the fight that's happening in San Diego through the Center for Justice and Reconciliation and their other amazing partners. But first, let's talk about the global context. So depending on which website you go to, which statistics you look at, they say there's anywhere from 25 to 50 million in slavery today. No matter the number, it's staggering and it's sad and it's wrong. But there's more people in slavery today than ever before. That slavery includes labor trafficking and includes indentured servitude, not just sex trafficking, which we're going to primarily focus on today, but that we know of that large number, approximately 10% are being sexually trafficked around the world. And then we go and specifically look at Cambodia. We know that there are at least 300,000, if not more, in Cambodia alone that are being sexually trafficked. And of that, unfortunately, 10%, around 30,000 of those being sexually trafficked are children. We can move to the next slide. These are some global issues that we are facing, that other organizations are facing as well, some unfortunate trends. In addition to just the traditional forms of sex trafficking, which happen in brothels, massage parlors, karaoke lounges, back rooms of businesses, we also see that there is a growing rise of surrogacy and baby trafficking. So women that are either coerced or paid to raise, to get pregnant to raise babies that can be trafficked around the world. Unfortunately, we're seeing this a lot in China because of the one-child policy. There is a shortage of women. There's a shortage of girls, of brides. So they are trafficking babies, raising them up for prostitution or for brides, but also, unfortunately, engaged in organ harvesting as well, which is tragic. We also see child labor exploitation on the rise. So children that are being exploited for labor, especially we see in Cambodia because of the growing construction industry there, fueled by China, interestingly enough. They need more bricks for building. And so with that brick production, there's a lot of families that are indentured and children that are indentured in slavery. And so these are some interventions that we've done recently. So in addition to our traditional intervention against sex trafficking, we are doing whatever it takes, and we're intervening in these situations where we're seeing other forms of trafficking happening. And next slide. In addition, our team has intervened to help return Cambodians back to Cambodia that have been labor trafficked to other countries. So whether it's Vietnam or Malaysia or Thailand, Saudi Arabia, China, Somalia, where Cambodians in particular are coerced for better jobs. They get to the country, they take their passports, they are basically then indentured slaves. We recently intervened in a case where we were able to rescue 30 Cambodian men that have been labor trafficked to Somalia as fishermen. When they were able to get off the boats, get back into perhaps an internet cafe, communicate with their friends and family on Facebook, we were able to intervene, actually get them to the Thai consulate in Somalia, and then eventually return them back to Cambodia, back to their home. So these are some of the global issues that we're facing in addressing trafficking. We can move on to the next slide. Particularly in Cambodia, this issue is exacerbated, and it was such a tragic issue and such a tragic situation in Cambodia. And a lot of that has to do with the history of Cambodia. So if you're familiar with the history of that region, the Khmer Rouge communist regime that took over in Cambodia basically evacuated everyone out of the cities, forced them into labor. Their goal was to grow rice across the entire country. Ended up in the murder of over 3 million Cambodians. If you were educated, if you were religious, if you wore glasses, if you were seen as a threat to the Khmer Rouge, basically they killed you. And towards the end, they were raising up children as child soldiers to go after adults and sometimes even after their parents. Those are the adults of today. So those children, now adults, grew up in a moral vacuum where basically the entire fabric of society had been destroyed, and children became a commodity for survival. They became a way for families to afford, and sometimes in many cases, just the basic necessities. There's a Cambodian saying that men are gold and women are cloth. So what happens when that cloth is soiled or dirty, they're basically tossed out. And unfortunately, that is a perception of the value of women. So we're not only there to rescue girls out of sex trafficking, we're not only there to prevent this from happening, we're also there to help reset some cultural values around how they value women. So that's really the vacuum that became the situation in Cambodia, why it's such an epicenter, and why we intervened in Cambodia 16 years ago. The picture you see on your screen is a picture of Svaipak, which was the epicenter. You saw on the video that man asking for sex with the youngest child. That is undercover footage that was taken in Svaipak, whereas once there were children that were trafficked openly on this street. That's all been shut down. There's where there once was massage parlors and karaoke lounges and brothels. There's now a church, a community center. There's employment centers where we employ the survivors. That street has since been paved, and kids now rollerblade on the same street where they were once trafficked. That's only possible through the gospel of Christ, through the love of Christ, and through dedicated people that have gone there and have dedicated their lives to this journey. So let's go on to the next slide. It all started for AIM back in 2005. Don and Bridget Brewster moved from Roseville, California, just down the street from me here in Rockland, to fight on the front lines. You saw in the video, they started with the restoration home, they started with English classes, and what has emerged over the years is this holistic model that I will talk about. We have over 15 programs and 400 staff there. The majority of whom, 90% of the staff we have in Cambodia, are Cambodians that are raising up to be a part of this fight for the future. So let's go on to the next slide. So our holistic approach, we've seen this as a successful model that we've not only been able to use in Cambodia, we're now taking to Belize, and we've helped other organizations implement all over the world. Hawaii, Santa Cruz, the Tri-Cities area, and Washington State, and other places where we've handed off this holistic model to other organizations for them to implement this in their local area. But we know this has been successful in Cambodia because of the recidivism rate. The national average in Cambodia that's tracked by the Cambodian government through their safe houses, which doesn't have employment attached at the end, and of course doesn't have Christ in the middle. their recidivism rate is 90%. So girls that go back into the life, go back into trafficking, they have a recidivism rate of 90% or a success rate of 10%. Our success rate is just the opposite. It's 95 to 99%. We'll talk about the holistic model in just a second and unpack that. But some of the keys to success there is obviously Christ is in the middle of everything that we do. These girls, no matter from the moment that they're rescued, through our restoration process, into our employment, and even as they go back to the villages to reintegrate with their families, these girls are experiencing the love of Christ every step of the way. And we never force anyone to accept Christ. But many of them do because they're experiencing something that they've never experienced before. And then also very importantly is we provide life skills, job skills, and employment opportunities for these girls so that they have options of not going back into the life. Next slide, we'll talk about the important part of prevention, which is a key to fighting trafficking anywhere. We want to stop trafficking before it starts. We believe that the cost of exploitation is too high. We want to prevent that from ever having to be paid. So we have a school in at-risk community for 600 children that where if they can get an education, there will be more value placed upon their life, and the chances of them being trafficked is minimalized and even reduced. We have community center, a local church that we work through to provide programs for the community. Right now, a lot of that is focused around humanitarian aid. Because of COVID, the economy has collapsed. There's no tourism. And so families are in desperate need. And so our church is an epicenter for now delivering aid. So in that community of SWIPOC, which was once an epicenter for human trafficking, the church is now an epicenter for care and relief going out into the community. We provide healthcare, kids clubs, which are a safe place for kids to play. We also have a Lord's Gym, which is an outreach to traffickers. So it's a place where young men can go, learn how to kickbox, and fight Taekwondo by a national champion coach. And we've seen a lot of young men get out of trafficking because they now have an alternative means of providing for their families. Let's move on to the next slide. Of course, we will rescue girls when they need it. We have a SWAT team that's actively investigating. You saw on the video kind of the history behind that. We intervene not only locally in Cambodia, but also across borders. We go up into China. We rescue girls that have been abducted and taken up there. And in addition, we provide legal representation for survivors and the prosecution of traffickers. So in addition to rescuing over 1,600 girls, we've also prosecuted over 300 traffickers through the work of our SWAT team. Next slide. After rescue, then you saw in the video, these girls go to a safe place where they can restore and heal. We have cutting edge therapy and counseling. And from the very moment those girls enter our restoration home, they're experiencing this unconditional love of Christ through our staff, social workers, and house moms that take care of them. We've seen over 900 survivors healed and restored through our restoration and transitional homes. Next slide. And then finally, the really key important part is providing a job. So that reintegration and empowerment and helping to end the cycle of exploitation. So we provide that life skills and job skills training. Again, our successful reintegration rate of 95 to 99%. We know that because we have social workers that follow up with these girls all along their journey. Whether they're working with us, we have over 100 survivors that we've employed within AIM as teachers, as social workers in our clothing factories, making clothing that we sell all over the world. In fact, the Center for Justice and Reconciliation has partnered with us and ordered T-shirts through our employment centers for the Aware Justice events that they've had in the past. But we've been able to reintegrate over 1,100 girls successfully back into society. And then the next slide, recipe for success. So a sustained presence on the ground. We've been in Cambodia for 16 years. And we've just now moved into the country of Belize, where we see a long-term presence. Again, that holistic approach. So looking at the cycle of exploitation and also how do we prevent it. Working through the local church is key. Demonstrating unconditional love to all involved. And then all sectors working together. So working with law enforcement, working with civil society, working with churches, working with universities, institutions of higher learning, education is so important. So it's not just a holistic approach of looking at this fighting trafficking, but also how do we get all sectors of society to work together to provide support for the work that's being done to fight trafficking. All right, shared a lot. I tend to get excited and talk fast, but I do want to transition from globally to what's happening here in the US. What we've seen in our research and also in working with local organizations to implement our holistic model, the average victim of sex trafficking in the United States is 11 to 14 years old. And actually, I think this is a good opportunity to bring Kim in from the Center for Justice and Reconciliation. She can provide some local context as well from the perspective of her work in San Diego. There's some information, some stats on the screen, but I think one thing that I would say, the difference between trafficking globally and trafficking in the US is that in the global context, trafficking happens through the sale of children by a family member or trusted individual, an occasional abduction, whereas in the US, and as they've seen in San Diego, trafficking usually happens through gangs, prostitution rings, engaged in coercion or recruiting and that sort of thing. So Kim, is there any context, any additional information that you would add to this from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and welcome everyone. Happy to be here today. It's interesting because research that we did in cooperation with the University of San Diego a few years ago found that the average victim in San Diego is 16, so slightly older. Obviously, when you look at averages, you have to remind yourself that that means there are victims on both sides of that, both young and old, much older. And the primary form that we're seeing trafficking happening here in San Diego, 85% of our victims are actually US citizens. So although like this stat that Matt shared about 14,000 to 17,000 victims trafficked into the US for a variety of different reasons, 85% of what's happening here in our region is actually an internal issue with US citizens being exploited. And that's the sex trafficking side. Labor trafficking, we think, is probably eightfold of that and definitely addresses more of the folks coming in from out of the country. But we're seeing our most common form of trafficking in San Diego is actually something called boyfriend pimping, where a typically slightly older male will groom a vulnerable girl in a situation where she completely believes that he is her boyfriend. And over time, then ultimately he exploits that relationship and what they call turns her out or starts to traffic her.
Good, let's go on to the next slide. We want to talk about what does the holistic model look like in the US. So if we've seen the success of a holistic model in places like Cambodia, what can that look like in the US? Of course, rescue is important. So local, regional, national law enforcement working together. Restoration is important. So one of the things that we're doing is we're working with local churches to increase awareness around the problems within the foster care system. Unfortunately, a lot of trafficked children do come out of the foster care system. And so there are programs, CASA, for example, where individuals can become a CASA advocate, a court-appointed special advocate for a foster care child and develop a relationship with that child. And if that child is at risk, they can help intervene to get that child out of that at-risk situation. And also we've seen families that are willing to adopt survivors, adopt at-risk children as an alternative to foster care. We've seen that as a successful solution. We've done a pilot here in the Sacramento area, and we're seeing other churches and other ministries do this as well. Then obviously working within reintegration, employment is so important. So finding economic alternatives for these girls, working with local businesses, working with local organizations like Pride Industries and businesses that find trauma-informed employment. So that's important because, again, these girls have been traumatized. They've been through so much. They need safe employment and employers that are sensitive to the situations that they've been in. And then finally, prevention. There's a lot of increased awareness that's available through churches and schools and a program called Protect, which Kim can share more about as well.
Yeah, one of the things that is so interesting and not surprising, but I think is important to point out are the commonalities. I mean, we know that trafficking overseas happens in a lot of different forms than what we see here locally. But we have some things that are really common. One is, and I'm sure you could speak to this extensively, Matt, is the issue of demand. I mean, we just know that without demand, we're not going to have a problem. So the reality of both overseas and here locally, not just in San Diego, but across the United States, is we still have an incredible demand for purchasing sex. And as long as we have that demand, we're going to have people that take advantage of that and exploit that for financial benefit and exploit people. So that's a commonality. No matter what kind of trafficking you're looking at, you're always looking at this foundational issue of demand, which frankly is a harder thing to talk about and something that we don't hear talked about as often, because in the United States, there is a cultural acceptance of buying and purchasing sex. We know that, in San Diego, it's a misdemeanor. It's a slap on the wrist. It's no different really than getting a speeding ticket. And so it's not prohibitive. Law enforcement, it doesn't stop it. So we have a real issue that I think the church has an incredible opportunity to look at demand. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little more, Matt, and then I had another commonality I wanted to point out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll take it one step further, and perhaps a little bit more controversial is the issue of pornography. So pornography absolutely fuels trafficking. And obviously, men are the predominant viewers of pornography, women as well. But if men would stop looking at pornography, that would help solve the problem, because once a man sees it, he wants to then engage in it. But at the same time, something that men often don't realize is that when they are viewing pornography, oftentimes they are viewing victims of trafficking. So inherently, most men would say, trafficking is wrong. Exploitation of women is wrong, but they don't have a problem viewing pornography because they don't make the link between the two. So we are actually working with churches to help address the issue of pornography. We've seen some churches that have been very brave in this area, pastors that have actually stood up on stage and confessed to having issues with pornography, because we know it happens within the church as well. And so, yes, addressing demand is important, but also I think the root causes of that, we need to be willing to talk about the effects of pornography and that it's having upon men and upon our society. And exploiting women. That's a whole other topic of conversation, but it is very important, and I'm glad that you brought that up. We do have a curriculum that we've developed for men, specifically in Cambodia, to address this, and we're working with churches as well to develop curriculum and partnering with other organizations that have done that as well.
Which leads kind of this idea of prevention, Matt, that I know you're doing within AIM, and we're really focused on. So the Center for Justice and Reconciliation is focused primarily on prevention and education around the issues of trafficking. So we partner actually with Three Strands Global Foundation and the Protect curriculum. San Diego is in just the beginning of a fourth year of a major grant, $4 million grant to bring human trafficking prevention curriculum all across the region to kids ages 8 to 12th grade. Obviously in the lower ages, we're talking more social emotional learning. And then when we get up into 8th grade and beyond, we're actually addressing the issue of grooming and recruitment and the red flags. And we do that in concert with Protect, who launched out of your part of the state, Matt. And so happy to know, and not surprised to know that you're working with them. But we really believe that giving kids the tools here locally and across our nation, giving kids the tools to understand what's happening. And so our No More prevention curriculum is a drama-based, peer-led program, which actually presents a drama of a girl who's being groomed by a boyfriend, in quotes, she thinks is a boyfriend, right under the nose of her mom, her teacher, and her friends, but they don't know what they're looking at. They don't know what they're seeing. And that's really key, I think, is to equip our kids to move from being bystanders to being upstanders, and helping all of us understand what do we do when we see the warning signs. The other thing I wanted to point out, just in hearing your talk, the commonality of your focus in Cambodia around job skills and life skills. And although that's a different culture and there are different economic forces, that is exactly the same issue that we have in San Diego. Recidivism, same problem. Recidivism is a huge issue and something that the university and the center are trying to address and attack directly by helping build a better network of life skills and job skills and education. So we actually launched a program this year called the Flourish Academy, which is a life skills program for women in the San Diego region who are just leaving within the first year of leaving a life of exploitation. We're seeing incredible impact from that. These are skills that we would take for granted that we just learned in our development, but most people who are trafficked is they are actually, that's interrupted. They're trafficked during those really key ages when we're learning skills that end up helping us be able to thrive and hold down a job or go to school. And so the Flourish Academy actually grew out of the Beauty for Ashes scholarship, which came first. And now we've sort of flipped the paradigm, because what we're doing now is having people go through the Flourish Academy before they then come to the university under the Beauty for Ashes scholarship. And if you don't know about that scholarship, it's the first scholarship in the nation for survivors of human trafficking. I'm super proud of this university for stepping into that space. It was a very intentional move about 7 years ago, where we said, what can we do? Where can we put our stake in the ground? And we heard survivors of trafficking talk about college like it was just such a pipe dream. They didn't even put it on their list of things they thought they could do. And we thought we could change that. And we have. We're doing it one by one. And we have actually 4 students starting up with us this fall. We're super thrilled, and have had 3 women graduate. And the Flourish Academy feeds that by helping build the life skills so that somebody, when they get to college can thrive. So those are kind of our two ways we're looking at job skills and life skills, Matt, and just knowing that no matter where you are in the world looking at trafficking, if you don't provide those solutions, the recidivism, it's a revolving door. And why is that? I mean, I know here locally, it's a sense of a lack of options. So we don't talk about rescue here locally. Most women who are being trafficked would not identify themselves as even being trafficked, let alone needing rescue. They are caught in a series of choices that sometimes we call the choice of no choice, where economic pressures, perhaps addiction, all kinds of different vulnerabilities will play into somebody ultimately getting exploited and then feeling trapped and like there's no way out. But if the options, it's hard for us to imagine that getting out of the life of exploitation and being trafficked, that just getting out of it wouldn't be the answer. But honestly, from the women we know inside of the life, when they look outside to the future, they don't see anything better. They don't have any hope. And that's what we're trying to change with actually providing the skills so that they can build their own financial security and stability.
Yeah, and that's so important. The difference really with a place like Cambodia and other countries is the girls often get into trafficking differently. They're not recruited. Maybe they're sold by a parent or family member. They don't want to be there. And so when there's an opportunity for them to get out, they get rescued. They're happy to be out, but they do need that job. But at the same time, there's still such a sense of honor and connection to the family that these girls want to have a job, not only for themselves, but to be able to provide for their family. So there is that sense of culture and honor that even girls that were trafficked by their parents still feel that sense of duty and responsibility that they will send money back to their family, back to their parents that trafficked them, just because that's such a cultural issue for them. But that job is so important so that they can do that. They can feel like they're honoring their parents as a part of their culture. So definitely different scenarios, different cultural aspects at play. But again, that employment, that job, those life skills are so important.
And it's such a good point, Matt, because what I'm hearing you say is centering the survivor in the story. So we can sometimes take our solutions or our ideas about what it looks like. And in fact, every person who's trafficked and exploited is different and unique, and they have a different story. And so I love that that's a part of your model of understanding that cultural honor And that even though we would look at that family and we might think like, you know, we don't want to support that. We don't want to support them being rewarded for that. In fact, to center the survivor in that particular survivor's story, that's going to be an important part of their of their culture and how they interact with their family. And so looking at the whole person, which I know that's what AIM does, is really looking at this holistic approach. And that's, I think we have to be, to do that, we have to be willing to stop and sometimes put aside and set down our ideas of what will work and really center the survivor's experience and story. Because from our experience, they have the answers within them. They know what they need and what's going to work. They need somebody they need somebody to come alongside them and stand alongside them as they pursue that healing.
Absolutely. It's good. So now I think we want to open it up for a time of Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Kim and Matt. I'm going to open it up and then Rihanna's going to get to your questions in the chat box. I would love to know, I think what's interesting to me when we're talking about story is, how did you two find yourselves in this story? How, you know, what drove you to lean into the work of fighting human trafficking? You know, this is something that is, since the work of the Center for Justice and Reconciliation has been an awareness of mine. But without that, you know, I would not have had the opportunity to step into these conversations and these understanding and learning. So curious, I'll have you start, Matt, of, you know, what drove you to the place that you are now and what pushes you to continue the work? Because I'm sure it's not easy work.
Yeah, no, it's not always easy. I think for me, it really started, I was on staff here at a local church, Bayside Church in the Sacramento area. And Bayside Church has a focus on anti-trafficking work. And I was part of a team that was getting to know different organizations and deciding what does Bayside want to do and helping to fight human trafficking. And so I got to know AIM through that second party lens, met our founders. I got to go visit the work in 2016. And I was just blown away. I've been a missionary. I've lived overseas, kind of seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of missions, and was so impressed with what I saw with AIM, the holistic model, the evil and the depravity that this is. Seeing men that look like me walking around alone on the streets of Phnom Penh. What are you doing here? Like, why are you here alone in Cambodia by yourself? You know why they're there. And this anger rose up inside of me. I didn't realize I had such an anger problem. But I also realized, you know, Jesus died for everyone. He died for those guys as well. So, you know, prayed for them instead of punching them out. But also to see the hope and these girls that come out, not only transformed and restored, but joining in the fight, as we say, from victim to survivor to abolitionist. To see that hope that they are now engaging in the fight, it's only possible through the power of Christ and the love of Christ and the gospel at work. That was really what encouraged me to get more involved in this work, speak on behalf of AIM, and then eventually they asked me to join the team. And so it's been a fun, exciting, tragic at times, but it's been a great journey over the last almost 3 years now.
And Matt, it sounds like you and I kind of fell into the same thing where we volunteered for an organization that we ended up working for, because that's the same, my trajectory also. I'm an alum of the university, and about 8 years ago was really doing some internal work and looking at, like, how do I live a better story? How do I live into my faith? How do I actually do stuff? What does my love look like? And found out about, well, I actually started doing some reading around issues that women and girls face around the world. Read a book called Half the Sky, which is a great book that looks at forces that women and children face and solutions, and became more aware of human trafficking. But at that time thought it only happened in places like Cambodia. And so I was looking for what organization to get connected to when I found out there was a little girl, she was 13 years old, who was being trafficked in my neighborhood park. And my daughter Brooke was that age. So I had just this this awakening of like thinking of my little Brooke in her bed in her room, and then this little girl who was being sold every night for her dad's drug habit outside in a park in my community. And I knew I couldn't unknow that. And that led to my coming to Point Loma as a volunteer to help launch the Beauty for Ashes Scholarship, and then my journey over the years to this position that I never imagined finding myself in, frankly, but really see how God has worked in my life. But I think something you said was making me think about just the going from victim to survivor to abolitionist. And one of the ways we say it is going from victim to survivor to thriver. Mm-hmm. And I think just like you're seeing with AIM, we're seeing the same thing. We actually have an incredible woman on our team at the CJR who was our first graduate of the scholarship. And she is actually now, she's a community leader, and she's leading the Flourish Academy and interacts with all of the over 60 people that are hoping to come here under the scholarship at some point. And that's just an example of coming alongside someone who had everything within her. And because of Christ, like you said too, Matt, I think we know too that our center is Jesus. And we don't know how anyone can make it out and stay out of a life and survive that kind of trauma without Christ. And so we feel really honored that we get to work in spaces around the region that aren't always faith-based. Many times we're in the public schools, but our center point is Jesus and that hope. And so we have seen that same model and I think there's nothing more powerful than someone who's come out of that kind of exploitation to be somebody for somebody in the middle of it to come to and to look to and to know there's hope. I think that those folks are the folks that provide the most hope, I think, to people in the middle of the exploitation.
Definitely. Thank you both for sharing that. Matt, did you want to add some more? Did you jump in there? No. Okay, great. Well, I have some questions for both of you, so you'll hop right back in. So one question here, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat. One question here is asking Matt, when you discussed recidivism, did you mean it as in the return to being trafficked itself, or different exploitative work opportunities?
Yes, all of the above. So either returning back to the brothel, massage parlor, karaoke lounge that they were rescued from, or looking for other exploitative work. That's what we mean when we talk about recidivism. Yeah.
Perfect. And then you touched on this a little bit, but if you wouldn't mind expanding, how does your model address demand?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we have developed curriculum for men in Cambodia that we are distributing through local churches and other organizations that helps address the issue of the link between pornography and trafficking. We know that the rate of exposure to pornography is on the rise within Cambodia through internet cafes and other sources of even iPhones. Now iPhones are more common in Cambodia even, and so young boys are exposed to pornography at a very early age. That just trains their mind, trains their thought patterns to eventually want to act out. And so whatever we can do to combat that through this curriculum that we've developed through working with local churches and organizations over in Cambodia, but also here in the US, like I mentioned, working with local churches, working with partners like Covenant Eyes that have great protection software for men that want to address this and have safeguards in place on their computers. Covenant Eyes is a great resource. We promote them as often as we can as a solution for men. But also just sharing in general in talks and breakout sessions at conferences where we've been able to just help create an awareness of the link between pornography and trafficking, because a lot of people don't go there initially in their mind, but when you help create that link and they realize that link, they can actually make a decision about what they're involved in.
Perfect, thank you. And you mentioned, both of you mentioned and kind of spoke to the average age of a victim of trafficking. And I'm wondering if you two could speak to more of the demographics of specifically in the US and in our community, who is being trafficked and what are the kind of, the makeup of those people?
That's such a great question, because one of the really important findings from the research we did is exactly around that, is who is being trafficked and who are the traffickers. And what we found was, like I mentioned, almost all the victims in San Diego are US citizens, and the age range spans very wide. But the demographics of the person who is trafficked cross every socioeconomic status. They cross every race and ethnicity. So do the traffickers. So when we talk, a lot of times we show a picture, their eyes are blacked out, but we show a picture of 5 people who have all been arrested for trafficking in San Diego. And there's a woman in that group. There are men of all races and ethnicities. And that's really important to know, that both the victim and the trafficker could be anyone. So although we know vulnerabilities that will definitely make you more vulnerable to being trafficked, anybody can be trafficked. And we see on the buyer side too, that crosses all socioeconomic. So there's no cookie cutter way to describe somebody who's being exploited. We do know, just one little bad fact about San Diego is, if you're a runaway in San Diego, you've got 48 hours or less to be approached by a trafficker. So when you're on the streets in San Diego and you're a minor, you're really at risk of being exploited. And that will usually happen through what they call survival sex, where that exploiter will offer them a place to sleep or food to eat, or something, basically survival needs, and then in exchange they begin the exploitation. So there are lots of ways that people get sucked in. Now, I don't know what else, if you have anything else you want to offer about like who.
I'll jump in real quick for that, if you don't mind. I've got a quick follow-up to that. I mean, that feels very overwhelming for the average human learning these stats right now. I'm imagining there's some things that we can be doing that are very helpful, and some things that seem like they may be helpful, but they might not be helpful at all. Like, I'm imagining just approaching someone on the sidewalk might not be the best choice to assume if someone's part of trafficking. I'm wondering if you have some kind of best practices for engaging. If you see something, I guess specifically something that is unsettling to you, or if you have questions or concerns, what's the best next step?
Yeah, I think it's really important, if you see something, to be willing to say something. It feels really weird. You see something, you're not sure. I just had someone text me last week, like, I'm not really sure what I'm seeing, but it doesn't really feel right. And to really learn to listen to that. But to your point, Kendall, like going up to somebody on the street, I mean, the compassion that we feel, and when we're activated and we learn a little bit about this, I can pretty much guarantee you, if you pay attention, you'll start noticing things that you didn't notice before. But it not only is not safe for you to step into the middle of that, but it's probably even more unsafe for that person, because they're not out on the street and not being watched. And in fact, most victims are not on the street, although we are seeing an uptick in that. It was just on the news actually last night. We are seeing an uptick in street trafficking, what they call street prostitution. Most of them aren't out like that, but when you do see something, you could put them more at risk with their exploiter if you do anything. So really calling law enforcement. Maybe, Rana, you could put the the national trafficking hotline. That's something good to just have in your phone. You may think you'll never need it, but most people I know, once they know about this, then they see something, and it's definitely worth calling. If you call the national hotline, they route it to whatever your region is. They route it to your local law enforcement. They track things. So if they get multiple calls about a location that just looks funny, and they've got that, once they have enough, calls about that, then it could trigger some kind of an investigation. So it really does matter to say something. And then maybe Matt, you can talk to this. I feel like, not everyone's going to do what we did, right? Nor would they need to leave whatever you were doing to go into this full time. But I do feel like there's there's a place for everyone in this work. There's just, there's something everyone can do. And that's the thing that we work the hardest on, is helping people who get activated, who learn about it, to know, like, what do I do about it?
Yeah, prayer is huge, because this is spiritual warfare. This is a spiritual battle that we're fighting on the front lines, locally and globally. And Chelsea put some links in the chat. We do have some resources just to help people get aware, so that you're aware of what's going on locally and globally. There's actually an action guide where someone who's really passionate can start to look at ways that they can get involved and actually map out a potential action plan for their life. And there's a devotional which they can just pray and just become more aware. So we've developed some resources on our website. There's a ton of other resources out there, both on the AIMS website and the CJR's website. Awareness is key, because what that does is, as Kim alluded to, you just become more sensitive to what's going on around you. You start to see things. Around the corner from our old office was a massage parlor that just did not feel right to me. It was just sketchy. I'd walk past it, the windows were blacked out. A lot of trafficking happens through massage parlors. There are legit ones, but there are also not legit ones. And this one just gave me the creeps. I had a feeling. I had a friend who's in the local law enforcement. I talked to him about it. He's like, you know what? I should probably go check that place out. He did, and sure enough, it was a place for trafficking, where trafficking was happening. They actually shut it down. And so you can be involved without being involved. If you see something and you feel like you have a way to report it or intervene or talk to law enforcement, I would say don't be shy. We've seen grandmas, go after some stuff in rural communities, report places where they just feel like this didn't feel right. I saw girls coming in and out, and it just didn't feel right. And they called the law enforcement, and sure enough, they were able to shut down a trafficking ring in Ripon, California, which is a very rural, almond growing community, which you wouldn't think trafficking was happening there, but it was. And this grandma shut it down. So good for her. So. Yeah,
and we also, through the Center for Justice and Reconciliation, we run Churches Against Trafficking, which is a group of churches and people of faith that have come together to try to take action. And we have a whole set of action steps. So to your point earlier, Matt, about foster kids, and there's a lot of ways you can jump in depending kind of on where you're feeling pulled or called. So I know that Brianna put that up in the chat, but that's also a great resource. You can take that back to your church, or you can do it individually, but it gives you lots of different ideas for how to jump in and what you can do. And also, I'm gonna say one more thing, sorry. Talk to your kids. I mean, my son's almost 25, and I'm so grateful and thank God for this, that we were able to raise a young man who really understood the value of the humans and not watching pornography or buying sex, and actually spoke up about that. And it's really culturally counterculture to be a college student and speak out against porn. But I think we need to raise men who we can talk about it in our homes. So it's not a subject that isn't talked about and discussed, so they don't feel alone and without support. And same with our girls. Like, we need to not put fear in our kids, but help them understand what's out there and what trafficking and grooming look like, so that they know, and then helping them know what to do, which is what these prevention curriculums are all about. They're really to help not scare kids, but to not only teach them, but then to help them know, like, how do they act? What do they do?
I think we've answered most of the questions, but I want to end with this one really specific question. Is we touched on a lot of different ways to get involved, and honestly, there's something for everyone, no matter who you are or what you do or what you're interested in. There's a way to get involved in the movement against human trafficking, which is a really great thing. It makes this huge, dark, overwhelming issue seem a little bit less overwhelming when we can each contribute. But Kim and Matt, I'd love to hear how people can specifically get involved by volunteering for AIM and the CJR.
Kim, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yes, we are always looking for support and involvement. I think for volunteering, actually like physically volunteering yourself, I would say activating you in your local church or in your local community, and we can help you do that. We can help give you resources so you can do that. And then helping our programs. You know, we are completely donor based, and we really appreciate the support of the university, and they support us in so many ways, but we do have to raise 100% of our funds for the Beauty for Ashes Scholarship and the Flourish Academy. We raise from outside of university support. So we are always looking for donors, as I know Matt is.
Yeah, I would say when we are able right now, unfortunately due to COVID, we're not able to take volunteers over to Cambodia. When we are able, we love to have people come and join us, walk alongside us. We never create, we're very cautious about short-term missions and the effect that it has. We're always looking for opportunities for people to come alongside our work. So whether it's helping us put on a kids club, or teachers working with teachers, or doctors working with doctors, it's always in addition, alongside of what we're doing. And we never create an opportunity just for a team to show up and do busy work. That's not healthy for anyone. When Cambodia opens up, there's opportunities there. We hope to be able to open up teams to Belize within the next year. We just launched work there in January. We do have events occasionally in areas, and if you sign up to be a volunteer with us, we can inform you when an event is coming to your area that you can get involved in. But also, as Kim said, just getting your church involved, partnering with us. We have a number of great partnerships with churches that not only support our work, but also order their clothing through us. So t-shirts they need for their vacation Bible schools. You're going to need t-shirts anyway. Why not order them through us and provide a job for a survivor? And so there's a lot of different ways that people can get involved and help support the work, in addition to financial support, which of course is very important. That helps keep our engine of restoration and healing going. So yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for the work that you're doing, the investment in changing others' lives. It's amazing to see how your passions and your roads from Point Loma, both being Point Loma grads, to where you are now. I'm just really grateful for the work that you're doing. Grateful for all of our alums and friends who are on the call today for leaning into this conversation. There's many more conversations to be had, and we look forward to our continued partnership with CJR and with AIM in the future. So I know we've got lots of resources in the chat. We will be able to provide those in a follow-up today. We'll send out an email to all of those on the call and be able to provide you with all of those resources. Continue to stay involved, lean into the conversation. Thank you for your work today. Again, thank you, Matt. We appreciate you, Kim, Brianna.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Happiness.
God bless you guys. Bye-bye.